today, and I saw that. Hank. I saw that. You crafty little bugger. Yeah.
Yeah, you started saying that, and I had already hit the button.
Oh my gosh.
You know me too well.
We're all just
Hello,
kids here.
everybody. Welcome to week 2 of our short story challenge. Small stories, big impact. How's everybody doing this week?
Fantastic. I'm excited. I'll cover for you, Abby. Don't worry.
I'm still
I'm
eating my
excited.
muffin.
I was gonna say, how's that muffin, Abby?
I'm afraid I have blueberries in my teeth. That's why I'm like.
They're just pure blue.
Yeah. What are a few blueberries amongst friends?
Yeah.
I'm doing fantastic this week, and coming off of this writing sprint, I just want to highlight again a big congrats to it was B that finished your novel, right? Because you said thought I would have more problems switching gears from one story to the other today. Finished your book on dragons and then switched over to the ghost one, just like that.
That's way to
go. Oh,
so
man.
Congrats, B. That's awesome.
I'm having all kind of facial itches today, and because I'm on camera, it makes it 15 times worse. So I'm self-conscious about it. Anyway. So how did everyone read the short stories from last week that we assigned?
I forgot to reread The Gift of the Magi, but I know what happens.
Yeah,
So
you
we'll
know
just
the story.
go with
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I did read
same
the
boat.
other.
Yeah, the
So
lottery.
did either of you have any comments about either of those stories? Like, or were there, since we're now thinking about short stories, when you reread a short story, even if we're very familiar with them, did you notice things about them after rereading them with your short story writer cap on?
I definitely did.
Yeah.
Abby, do you want to say anything first, or?
No, I was just gonna say I read it before we started talking about short stories last week, so I wasn't already thinking about the things that you had said.
Yeah.
I just knew I was reading it, knowing what happened at the end. I was surprised that rereading The Lottery, I still left with this emotional like slap in the face. Even though I knew what was happening, it still got me. Like it almost made it worse because I picked up on all the clues.
You knew what was happening. That's a dramatic irony right there. If you want to slap the official label on it. I was
so interesting. Let me interject one thing here, but so I don't mean to disrail what you're going to say, but it's interesting that there are, we'll just use movies for an example, because I think this is a common thing. There are certain movies, especially with a twist ending, or what even might be considered kind of a cheap twist ending, that once you have seen the movie and know that twist, the movie is forever spoiled for you. You can never watch it again. Yeah,
Sixth Sense.
Okay. Any
one of his movies.
Was that M. Night Shyamalan?
M. Night Shyamalan.
Okay. I was thinking of the movie The Village. Are you guys familiar with
M. Night
The Village?
Shyamalan.
Another M. Night Shyamalan.
Right. Well, someone spoiled the ending for me before I ever watched it. And the entire time I'm watching it, I'm just dismantling the story. There's no I did not sink into the movie world. It was just ruined for me. I could, and it was an awful experience. It's funny how even though we talk about these short stories and you know the ending, it still has a dramatic impact on you. What do you think is the difference?
A couple
I don't know.
things.
Well, go ahead, Doug. Tell me what you think.
Time investment, first of all.
Okay.
Takes you 15 minutes to read The Lottery. So it's not just that it takes up less of your time, but you can then use that time to appreciate other aspects of it, even if you know what's coming. And so the little happy, hey, how's it going kind of things is so much worse when you know they're gathering for the purpose they're gathering for, right? And you can
you're like, run. Why are you so blasé about
first time you read through it, those pleasantries, those like normal things you almost gloss over because they're just it's small talk at that point, right?
So you're reading it in a different voice, do you think? Like in your head. Like the first time I read it, it's like, oh, hey, how you doing? Oh, everybody, let's go. But then the second time I read it was like, oh, hey, how you doing? Like there was a different
Well, see, no, I didn't even think that the actual voice of the characters was different. It's just, in fact, it was the sameness with which I read their voices, which made it more uncomfortable. Right? Because this is ordinary for them. It happens every year. It's just, it's, you know, as things get worse, as things get narrower, and the lottery winner gets closer to being chosen, then they get a little more stressed. But at the beginning, you know, it's the lottery again. Oh, go gather the stones, little boys. Like,
I'm going to say that
strange.
I could see it. I could see both of your experiences being true, because knowing the ending, like Abby says, it lends some gravitas to the characters. Then there's almost a deeper meaning that you're, as the reader, assigning to it, even if it's not written that way. But the way you process the story changes. Or you could approach it like Doug, and everyone, you read it exactly the same, and that makes it that much more heart-wrenching when you see that they are just blindly passing through, and this has just become normal. And how twisted is it that this is just normal?
Yeah.
Anything dystopian just makes me feel gross, though. So
I think that's the purpose.
Yeah, I know it's the purpose, and it's why I don't read it.
Right. I just opened my browser and read the news that day, and there's enough dystopian already. Who needs to go to that for entertainment?
What struck me with short stories that I've been thinking about ever since I reread The Lottery for this is that I approach storytelling from I don't want to say like a clinical perspective, but like I do a lot of the theory stuff when I do like workshops and shows and whatnot, right? So I'm often thinking about character arcs and journeys and stuff like that. I'm sure there are short stories out there with character arcs, but it's almost like I don't know, the impact is still character driven, but it's not about their transformation. It's about their experiences. Which is taking me some time to try and figure out how I want to implement in my own story, because I'm so used to talking about the lie and the big hurt and the need that they have to experience and the truth that they embrace by the end of it. And when you give me 5,000 words, like, sure, I can put it in there, but it's not going to be good if I do it that way.
So I've been thinking about my story, because when I started reading about genre requirements just for MG horror in general, because again, I'm kind of a little bit out of my comfort zone here. I'm more in Doug's comfort zone. But one of the things that I found that I thought was kind of interesting was it said in MG horror, there is still a trend that it's a happily ever after. It does not end on a sad, dark, deep note, because it is MG. That, not to say that you couldn't, but it said the trend is that you still have a happily ever after. There's a good lesson learned and everything's okay in the end. I guess because you don't want to take a young reader and leave them feeling the same grossness I felt when
and traumatize them.
The Lottery.
Their parents.
Right. So that actually made me rethink what my ending was going to be, because I wanted to shift it so that I met the genre requirements. And, you know, we can have this whole discussion about the rules and are the rules good or bad? Well, in this case, I'm going to let the rules guide my ending, because I do want to write something that a kid is going to pick up and it's going to satisfy that reader. Right. So I'm not going to start off trying to break any rules. Not right out of the gate with my first MG short story.
Well, let's since you went there, Abby, let's get into our discussion for this week. And I've got some slides for this, but we won't put them up just yet.
Can I have 1 second before we do that?
Absolutely. Go ahead.
Just NJ saying, I think my old horror was an MG then. I forgot to circle back to NJ's horror. in our writing sprint. So NJ, go and post about that in the Storycraft Cafe. Like, tell us what it's about, because I'm interested. I wanna see what you dug up.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Absolutely.
Sorry, Hank, go on.
No, I was just gonna review what we talked about last week. We developed a short story concept. And we did some of that kind of pre-work ahead of time by saying that we were going to do stories set in the 80s and they were going to be speculative fiction. Speculative fiction is a broad enough net that we can try out some different subgenres in there. I landed on my story is about a young protagonist who feels out of place. He's a teenager and he works part time in an arcade, and he usually hangs around after hours to play games. And he discovers there's a character in a video game who comes out of the game and wants to come to our world, and for longer than just overnight, because every morning he has to go back before customers come in, and he wants to find a way to break the barrier and become a citizen of our world. And then some twists happen, and shenanigans go on,
Hijinks.
and hijinks, and of course it doesn't turn out the way you expect it to, because short story. So that's we identified a protagonist and a core conflict. So there's mine. My protagonist feels out of place and is met by an out of place character, and there's an interesting kind of meeting of the worlds there, where each character is out of place in their own world and would rather be somewhere else. So that's kind of my core conflict. I explored personal experiences for story inspiration. That was one of the things we said. Some. I think we can all relate to being an awkward teenager who, the world doesn't understand us, and we'd rather be anywhere but here. And if I were running the world, things would be so different. I think we can all connect.
You don't even have to be awkward to feel that way.
Right.
And I think
Or
all
a teenager
teens feel that way.
Yeah, or a teenager.
Doug feels that way.
Well, yeah, a lot of us outgrew that, but anyway, yeah. And we learned about short story structure last week, and we created a basic outline using the tent pole method. And this was something that I suggested, of kind of coming up with 5 story concepts or points, and instead of thoroughly outlining every individual block of a scene, have these 5 tent poles so that you can kind of blow through the story and allow your creativity to fill in the cracks between. So it's a little pantserish with a roadmap, so we don't get totally off the rails. Boy, I just love mixing metaphors this week for some reason. My brain is just, anyway. It's kind of the best of both worlds. If you feel pantserish, this gives you the freedom to express that, while also having the guardrails to keep you on track and keep you from going on. So anyway, that's kind of a review of what we talked about last week. How did Abby, I talked about my protagonist and my kind of core conflict. What did you come up with?
So I am going to have an arc, but the arc is more just a realization.
Okay.
So the story is, so since we're kind of doing that 1980s speculative thing, I'm basing a character in it kind of on the Gremlins. And there's a cursed object, which I found is very typical in MG horror as well. So my cursed object is a trapper keeper. And the main character, who's the little girl, she draws a gremlin essentially in the trapper keeper, but she gets it wrong and she tries to erase it. And when she tries to erase it, her pencil looks like basically every little kid's pencil at school where the eraser is totally gone. And so when you try and erase, it rips the hole in the paper. Yeah. So she rips the hole in the paper, and the cursed trapper keeper allows the drawing to come to life. But the creature is missing, has a hole in the head where the ear was, which becomes sort of this portal that will suck things in and make them become drawings in the Trapper Keeper, right? But there's really no emotional arc in that. So I'm like, well, that's my plot device, right? That's my cursed object. That's my horror piece.
Yeah.
But I wanted to write a story where at the beginning of the story, there's a bit of a mean girl situation between the main character and another kid at school. So again, friendship scuffles, that's a very typical MG thing to deal with. Like, how do you navigate social structures as a middle schooler? So I wanted it to be a mean girl situation, but by the end of the story, the main character has to realize that actually she's the mean girl. She's been the one who is prompting that. So that's gasp. Doug's like, so I think that's like basically that's my emotional piece that she has to realize. And of course, because as my best friend pointed out, it's not really going to be MG horror unless a kid gets sucked into the Trapper Keeper. So of course, the mean girl from the beginning, Stacy, is going to get sucked into the Trapper Keeper, and the main character has to realize she's got to release her. So
I love that.
That's my whole piece.
I put up the slide because Randall said, can we briefly show those to remind us? And now that I think about it, Randall, if you're talking about the tentpole pieces, which, sorry, I'm a little slow today. I'll put those, I'll dig those up in a minute and we'll put those up on the screen.
Those were they not exposition, inciting incident, rising action, climax, and falling action? Didn't want to wrap up, whatever.
Yes, basically, yeah.
What? Sorry, go ahead.
And also, Sarah said, "Oh wait, I thought we were doing alt histories. Did I miss something?" Okay, we did talk about that, and technically, speculative fiction is wide enough to include an alt history. So if you want to write an alt history, I think you're well within parameters to do that.
And everyone on the Dabble team here, so we're all doing kind of alt history 80s themed spec fiction.
Yeah.
That's not a requirement by everybody in
of course not.
The challenge, right? Write whatever you want, but if you want to write in the 80s too, go for it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So you feel good about where you are, Abby?
I do.
You feel like you've got a handle on the story and ready.
I feel like I have the pieces I need in order to move forward. You know? Yeah.
We're going to talk about this in a few minutes, but I like to think about my ending from the beginning because that helps to kind of get that cyclical feeling to the story. Do you have an emotion that you're writing toward?
Well, just like I said, the realization that she was the one who was the mean girl.
Right.
And so
which I think is phenomenal. Yeah.
So, I mean, I think it's fitting. It's much more fitting than the feeling I was originally going to leave the readers with.
Yeah.
And so I have that. I think the part that I'm kind of hoping that I figure out along the way, and maybe this is something you guys can help me with, is how the magic works. So how is she going to destroy the cursed item that it then releases the kids back into the world and the objects and the items and the things that have been drawn in? So if anybody has any ideas about that, send them my way because I got nothing. I'm like, could she burn it? Well, how is she going to burn it at school? Like, she's not going to have a lighter, like, you know.
Yeah.
How is she going to put it in a trash compactor? Is she going to
and she use it to make something that can beat it?
Oh, maybe. I need everyone to consider that. Consider Doug's option and then tell me how that works. So
I like it. Doug, where are you with your story?
I'm excited.
So
I'm
tell
also
us what you come up with.
I'm writing a horror story, not MG. However, it is featuring teenagers, but I think that's because we're focusing on this 80s theme.
Yeah.
You know, all your 80s horror focus on teens, right? At summer camp or at school or whatever. It was a bad time to be a teenager, apparently.
Or because I was a teenager in the 80s, there was no social media and everyone was not walking around with a camera in their pocket. It was arguably the greatest time to be a teenager.
Just the dudes with machetes and blades for fingers.
We don't we don't
Different.
focus on that. Okay, that was
Razor blades and candy. We don't focus on that.
Anyway, so I have 3 teens, originally 5, but narrowed it down to 3 at Hank's suggestion. And they are staying in this new mall that opened overnight. That's like a challenge they
it's in a
put for
mall.
themselves. Yeah.
Of course.
I looked into, because I'm a 90s baby, right? I don't know this 80s stuff. So I had to do some research into what was cool in the 80s. And it was cool in the 90s and early 2000s to hang out in malls too, but I really wanted to get to that mall aspect. So new mall, they're like, hey, we're going to stay here overnight. And that's the idea of Alex, who's the leader of our 3. And what I've done is I've taken each of these 3 and I've given them some kind of big flaw that I'm going to exploit throughout the course of this night that they're in the mall. And hers is she overcompensates for her feeling of lack of control by controlling her friends. And so this was her idea. She wound them up there, and she's going to end up paying the price for this. There's Julian, who is also very insecure, but he shows his security by trying to be all modern on the fashion. He dresses well, tries to present a good look, a good outward look. And there's Tess, who likes to live life kind of in the fast lane. And as a result, she doesn't really care for saving things. She doesn't think about the impact on other people. And particularly, she's quite greedy, is her big flaw. And so throughout the course of the night, they're going to realize that this mall that they're in isn't a normal mall. And we're going to kind of spiral more into like a surreal horror kind of experience, which I'm excited for because I really like folk horror and supernatural horror. Those are like my 2 big genres. But surreal horror gets surreal. It gets very strange, right? Very weird. And so I'm gonna have it where I have this idea for these mannequins that show up and kind of move when you're not looking, and at the very end they're gonna
be mannequin,
right?
Me too.
They're gonna point Alex in the they're gonna try to direct her because she's out of control now. She doesn't have control towards the end of it, so they're gonna direct her, and it's not gonna end well for her. It's not a happy ending.
Of course not.
There's a scene I have in this food court where they're at the food court and then they go somewhere else and they swing back and the mannequins are sitting in the food court at the tables like they were normal people. Like I just have these ideas for certain things in my head. I don't want to say what specifically befalls the teens because we don't want to venture into spoiler territory, but it's definitely not
everything.
It's not MG horror because they don't make it out. So
ooh,
yeah.
Well, I know one story I don't need to waste time on. Okay, I have to say that at this point, you guys, as I'm watching you talk about your stories, both of you lit up. I saw smiles on your faces. You guys sound excited about the stories that you're writing. Contrast that with 2 or 3 months ago when we first started talking about this. Now, I will say both of you were game from the very beginning when I started talking about a short story challenge and publishing some short stories. You both never hesitated and said, yes, I will do it with you. But you both came kicking and screaming at the same time. And you told me all about your trepidations and your hesitations to writing short stories. Now, as we're talking about them and you're describing your stories, you seem very excited and very into it. What changed?
Abby?
Just that I had an idea for one. I mean, I'm just being real honest.
Look, an idea makes all the difference, doesn't it?
You got really excited though when you realized you wanted to write an MG horror. Like I remember that change in you.
Okay, I'm not gonna lie because I was like, Doug, he's so into this horror thing and I don't get it. And I'm like, I'm gonna try and understand my friend and I'm gonna write what he writes. And but once I have to say that once I realized in MG horror a happy ending was a thing, I got on board.
Okay.
And so
Okay.
I was like, okay, I can do this, because I don't like the idea of scaring myself, let alone my children. I mean, my kids, we used to have a giant turkey in the yard that was just very bossy, and he loved me, but anybody else, he would just throw his big old body into them and just bump them and gobble, gobble, gobble in their faces. And my kids were so afraid of this turkey that they were convinced he was going to come out of the toilet or the drain in the shower. So there was a long stretch of time where we didn't go to the bathroom alone. So like, I don't like the idea of, like, I don't know, maybe scaring someone else's children into that territory. And I was like, I don't know that I can get on board with this. But when I realized, no, like for MG, we dial it back a little, I can do it. I can do
Good.
that.
Excellent.
Okay. Are you thinking differently about the constraints, the word count constraints?
No, so, I asked you, I believe in sprints today, we talked about, is a middle grade short story shorter?
Yeah.
Which in that short story anthology that I wrote or I read, some of them were very short. Some of them were only like 4 pages.
Okay. So
this is going to be, I
1,000
think
words.
what I'm writing though is going to be longer, because it is.
Yeah.
And I'm going to go ahead and spoil this for you guys, because I'm all about spoilers today. Buckle up, Doug, because I'm pretty convinced that this is how I'm going to figure out if I want to turn it into a full novel.
Oh.
And wasn't that part of the beauty of a short story?
That wasn't. See, we've succeeded already. We're
challenge over, everyone.
Challenge over. We succeeded. See you guys at the next one. No, just that's wonderful, Abby. That's great. That's you lived out the experience of what we hoped to see.
For everybody.
Amazing. What about you, Doug? How are you feeling different about this than when we first started talking about it?
I think B nailed it on the head here. Hit the nail on the head. They started in on it instead of only thinking about it, which is true, right? And I think I'm always up for a challenge. I love learning new things. I love flexing my creative muscles and getting a workout in and whatnot, since we're mixing metaphors here. But and
one
then
of my favorite things, by the way, is just putting all the metaphors in a pot and stirring them up,
stirring it around. I once I got this idea, I started getting excited about it, and I think it's extra cool because actually, unlike Abby, I don't foresee myself turning this into a novel. And maybe I could, but it would be a different story. It would have to have more of an arc, and it would have to have a lot more obstacles in it and whatnot. And the way I'm envisioning it in my head, it's more like when I was growing up, Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark was like my go-to book. And I was thinking that when you mentioned the endings for MG Horror, Abby, because those stories did not end well, like ever. They were always depressing endings. So maybe that explains a lot, right? but like it inspired me to think of something like that, where it's not a super big transformation, not a super big arc. There is still a meaning behind it. There's excitement behind it. It doesn't feel cheap. It might go beyond 8,000 or 10,000 words, but I'm resigned to accept the fact that might happen, and then I can edit it down to meet the word limit requirement, Hank. So
whoever saw that coming?
I did see in the chat here, NJ asked a couple of questions, and I think Abby, you answered them in a comment there. But how do you know if it's MG or YA? And the main character's age is normally the determinant of that. I'll find some links when Hank starts going through his slide. I'll find some links to share about that as well, because I know we have some articles. But NJ also asked, I tend to have too many ideas. How do you narrow it down? And then Jacob swooping in with a little hint at something that I don't even know. Jacob, can I talk about it? Can I mention anything like this? Like, you can't drop that stuff on me in the chat.
Boom.
But let's just say we'll leave it regardless of what Jacob says, and I'll ask for forgiveness later. Dabble has always excelled at helping you organize your story ideas, and don't be surprised if it gets better at doing that as time goes on. Don't smile at me, Jacob.
I will say this, when things changed for me with my attitude towards short stories, there were two things that really helped me to embrace the art of the short story and to see that it was more than just a short novel. Two things. One, when I started thinking of the short story compared to the novel, and we talked about this last week, like when I said that the short story is to the novel as memoir is to the autobiography, whereas autobiography is cradle to grave, a memoir is a window into a specific time or a specific event, or some narrative thread in your life, but it's contained to that. The short story is the same way. Instead of a complete story beginning, middle, and end, it's a window into one event or one action or one emotion that this person is experiencing. So that helped me to kind of frame what a short story is. And the second thing that changed my thinking about it was that short stories tend to end on an emotion rather than wrapping things up neatly like you expect a novel to do. We don't like novels that just end on a cliffhanger, especially when they're not, book one of a trilogy. There's a certain aspect of cliffhangerish that we expect from that. Even though we do want a satisfying ending, we want lots to be unresolved. In a standalone novel, we don't want things to be unresolved typically. But a short story, we can have plenty that's unresolved as long as we're left on a solid emotion that the reader can then infer the ending as they feel that it plays out. When I kind of wrapped my brain around those two concepts, I was all in on the short story. So that's kind of how I began to think differently about short stories.
Well, and then they sent one of your short stories to the moon. So,
and three of them actually. I have three short stories that live on the moon now.
My bad, astronaut.
That's neither here nor there. Neither here nor there. But whatever.
Oh, so Jacob's got a great question right here. Did you see this?
Okay, so the big problem doesn't need to be resolved. Not necessarily. As long as you leave the reader feeling that it could be resolved and you give a satisfying emotional impact
punch
at the end. A punch, or you want to leave the reader feeling something, and you want to give them the threads of the ending of the story that, coupled with that emotional impact, they can continue that story in their head. That's kind of the best scenario.
So kind of branching off that,
yes.
Sorry, before we hop into there,
no, go ahead.
NJ
Go
asking,
ahead.
How do you determine what feeling to end on? My gut instinct is whatever feeling you want to end on.
Yes, exactly. And the perfect segue. Short story structure. We have the beginning, middle, and end, as all stories. In the beginning, we're going to introduce the character, the setting, and the inciting incident. We're going to go ahead and get to the point in the beginning. That's one thing about short stories. Get to the point. In the middle, we're going to develop conflict, build tension, show character choices. And in the end, we're going to resolve conflict depending on how much you want to resolve that conflict. We want to provide an emotional payoff and leave an impact. And then we're going to tack on that we want to think about the ending from the beginning. The emotional payoff at the end should make the reader think about your opening. So whereas I've talked to plenty of people who say, I just start writing a novel and have no idea how it's going to end. And then as I write it, the ending kind of presents itself. I like to think differently, even though I tend to be more pantserish in short story writing, never to the point of just writing into the dark, to borrow Dean Wesley Smith's term. I want to know the ending from the beginning and fashion that story so that I'm always writing toward that emotional payoff. So in the opening, my opening almost needs to echo that ending so that I ensure that emotional payoff and contribute to that almost cyclical fashion that we talk about in short stories. You guys have anything to add to that?
I've never written a story where I didn't know how it was going to end. And in fact,
me
this story,
neither.
yeah, this story I have I shared the last quote or the last line of dialogue in the cafe in a comment, but I have like the last 125 words already written because as I think Randall said somewhere in the chat here, the end can be a single sentence. Like my end is quite short compared to the other tent poles in the story.
Yeah.
Do you know who I imagine reading your end? Like who your narrator's voice is? Is that awful guy from Tales from the Crypt? Like that's who I'm imagining.
In this, it's going to be, and I cut out kind of the preceding dialogue tag, but it's the PA system. It's going to be a very robotic, cheery voice saying it to kind of juxtapose, not Tales from the Crypt, to juxtapose the situation that Alex finds herself in at the end. So I know exactly how it's going to end. And with the book that, like my fantasy book that I finished in January, I knew the last line that I wanted in that book, and so I kind of wrote towards it. Now, other times I've known just how a story is supposed to end, not the last line or the last paragraph, but I've never not known how I want a story to end. That's unbearably stressful for me.
Me too. And I don't know what it is if I think in terms of like punchlines, and I almost always think of the emotional impact that I want to end a story on. I almost always have the ending and the title of a story before I begin. Like I don't know. I mean, it's funny how different people's creative process works. Why do you? What's the judgment there, Abby?
No, I said not the title. I never have the title. Do you know how many times I've queried
I didn't say it's always a good title.
I mean, I changed the title like 3 or 4 times while querying because I'm like, maybe the title's not getting attention. I do really like the title that I have for this short story, though.
Good title.
So, Trapper, Keeper, Loser, Reaper, which I think is rhymes, and it's funny, but also, I mean, it sounds like something a kid would say, and
it plays on the finders, keepers, losers.
Yeah.
Everyone said when you're a kid. So that's.
I mean, the title might be the best part of the whole book, and I'm fine with that because that's also a win for me as someone who struggles with titles. I'm like, at least I nailed the title.
I think it's fantastic.
As Emily said here, I often don't know my ending, but I might find that I need to change my beginning, which is a perfectly valid way of writing as well.
That is, and next week when we start talking about revision, that'd be a great time to start looking at that, and just because it is, you have ideas in your head doesn't mean they can't change as you write it, and that's why you don't turn in first drafts, because then you get to go back and say, okay, I had a great idea in the middle, but it kind of shifted everything. Let's see now how I can alter my beginning to better echo this ending. And, that's, again, why we don't turn in first drafts. Unlike other people have recommended we do, but that's neither here nor there. So today we're going to go through a little exercise, and I posted this in the Storycraft Cafe, and I got some fantastic responses. We want to write 3 different openings for our story, one with dialogue, one with action, one with a striking visual or thought. So I'll start my story, Pixels and Paladins, as I'm calling it now. Could change, who knows? But these are my openings, and then we're going to go through mine, and then we'll Doug and Abby can go through theirs, and we're going to talk about it. So mine with dialogue. If I'd been born in the right century, I'd be wielding a sword instead of this mop, Kevin Palmer muttered, staring at his reflection in the darkened arcade screen where knights and wizards stood frozen, waiting for another quarter to bring them to life. So we open with Kevin Palmer, who is our protagonist, who is a teenager. He works in this arcade, and he feels out of place. He always feels like he was born in the wrong era, that he feels like he should have been born a medieval paladin instead of this pimply teenager who works at an arcade. So that's my opening with dialogue. And then the opening with action. The last customer stumbled out as Kevin Palmer flipped the clothes sign, But instead of locking up, he slid 4 quarters into the realm of Legends cabinet, the familiar electronic melody drowning out the manager's departing footsteps and the hollow feeling that followed him everywhere except when he was here, fingers on the controls, spirit somewhere centuries away. So again, we're conveying that same feeling. Kevin is out of place. He feels like he belongs somewhere else, but we accomplish the same thing with kind of setting the stage for where we are. And then the third, opening with a striking visual or thought. In the darkness of Starlight Arcade, 36 games hummed with electric dreams, but only one, standing in the back corner beneath the flickering overhead light, contained a world that recognized Kevin Palmer as the hero he was always meant to be. Now, my favorite of the three, I think, is this one. I think it does a good job of getting across the feeling that Kevin is dealing with of this is the only place where he feels at home, even though he's really meant to be somewhere else. So I'll open the floor to critiques.
Do you have something to say, Doug?
Only after you.
Okay.
Oh, she's raring to go.
All right. So I have to admit that though I have an unpopular taste when it comes to reading, in that I really love super voicey, omniscient narrators that do telling, but when they tell, I love it when they use these amazing phrases and things.
Yeah.
So I would argue that this is actually quite telling, but I'm so drawn to it because of that. Hummed with electric dreams. That's where you grabbed me, was with that phrase. And I would be so hard pressed if someone said to me, that's telling, get rid of it. I'd be like, heck no. I love this phrase and I'm keeping it. And so the voice in this one is my favorite out of all of them. Although I do think the one that starts with dialogue is also quite good because I like what he says in the dialogue. So, all right, Doug, that's you.
Well, I'll just interject here that I also love an omniscient third-person narrator, and I just love the idea of the whatever hovering above, giving us the kind of the lay of the land. I just love that. It's kind of my favorite thing.
I'm not gonna lie, Hank. This right here sounds like something I would write. That's why I'm like, I'm in. Do that one.
Boom. All right, I'll take it.
I am much in the same boat as Abby when it comes to which ones I prefer here, though I tend to dislike omniscient narrators unless they're done well. Now, when they're done well, to me, is when they have when they have their own kind of personality, and generally when they're sassy. I like a sassy omniscient narrator.
Okay, I'm with
that
it.
said, I really like this one for the things that Abby mentioned. The electric dreams, great, like killer line. The last line, or the last part of it there, contained a world that recognized Kevin Palmer as the hero he was always meant to be. Very much aligns in my head with the magical realism that you're writing.
Yeah,
right? This whole omniscient, a little bit of telling, and like this last, the way that you end it makes me know that this is a magical realism story right off the bat. So in addition to being written well, it does its job. The first one, if we can jump back to the dialogue one, I also like this one. Let's do there. I like this one because I don't tend to like omniscient narrators. This dials us in right to Kevin, and we get to know him right off the bat. That first line of dialogue does so much heavy lifting to get us to know who he is and how he feels, that I think it works really well as well.
Yeah, I agree in that this gives you an immediate sense of character. The fact that he's holding a mop kind of like shows you where he is in life.
Yeah.
And it is in the exact opposite place of a hero. And so
It also tells me that Kevin didn't realize what the life expectancy was a couple hundred years ago, and where he'd realistically be probably in
Touche.
the peasantry
Touche.
class. So
Right. Right. Well, we are talking about a pimply teenager. He doesn't have much concept. He slept through history class. Okay. Go ahead. Yeah. Okay. All
NJ
right.
asked magical realism ? In the chat there. Hank, can you describe or tell us what magical realism is?
Aside from looking up the actual definition, magical realism is when you have a normal present. You're in the real world, and in usually present tense or uh, recent history. We'll say not necessarily historical. It can be historical fiction, but where magic seeps into the real world, where it's not necessarily a magical world, but you're just everyday life, but odd things seep in, and that's how I like to describe it.
Like Water for Chocolate is the one that I always think about.
Yes. Water for Chocolate is a great example.
Yeah.
I'm sharing a link in the chat for an article that goes over what magical realism is, because it has roots in what country?
South America is where
I was going to say south of us is what I always say.
Yeah. And I don't understand why South America became maybe Randall has an answer for that. I know Randall is a fan of magical realism, as I am. And I'm not sure. I haven't delved that deeply into it, but it is a fact that a lot of magical realism authors come from South America for whatever reason.
Yeah.
Well, I have Doug's slides next, unless Abby wants to go first. We can do them out of order. Doesn't matter.
But I'm really hoping that you gave us all covers. Did you make us all covers for the books, or just
I did not. I just me.
I have a pretty good idea of the cover I want, though.
See, I didn't want to do it for you because you have the image in your head. But let's Doug, if we want to.
All right. So I didn't know. I mean, I could have asked you because we work together. So I have the inside scoop, but I didn't know how long you wanted our openings to be. So thank you for shopping. The mall is now closed. And again, the robotic, cheery PA voice, right? And this is what I'm probably going to go with. And it makes more sense with some context, as you read the story. But this is essentially the inciting incident is the mall closing. The kids, I thought maybe starting them like just before the mall closes and them hiding or something, but then this juxtaposed with the line that I have for the end is what I'm really vibing with. And it's simple, it's to the point, but once you realize that the mall itself is the dreadful thing that is going to keep our teens from escaping, then it adds some more gravitas to it, because it's a little bit of foreshadowing once you're on the end. So that's why I went with that. It's not even a person saying it, which I thought was kind of unique for dialogue. I felt a little artsy there.
I dig it.
The next one, opening with action. The metal security gate slammed down behind them with a rattling finality. Alex didn't flinch. Tess snorted. Julian just adjusted his jacket like they hadn't just locked themselves in. The overhead lights dimmed to an artificial dusk. The music is shifting to something softer, something unfamiliar. I actually, I like the visual of this, and I like that we kind of get the boom, boom, boom of our three folks that were in there.
Right.
That something ... unfamiliar was me saying I need to get this posted, and I don't know how to end this paragraph the way I want, so that wouldn't stay.
I do like it though. I love the feeling that you're assembling a heist crew. I love that aspect to it, and the ... unfamiliar. I get that we're stepping into strange territory. Like, I know that's not how you're going to leave it, but I think I'm getting a feeling for what you are feeling.
I think what kind of bothers me about my own words here is that I started venturing into almost that omniscient voice, because for my characters, it's a little unfamiliar because it's a new mall. They're trapped in there overnight. They've never been in a mall overnight before. But like, I don't know, it felt more Tales of the Crypt Keeper, less scary stories to tell in the dark to me. So
who is Alex pretty much
Alex,
like your main point of view character then? Okay.
Yeah. So then we go to this one, striking visual or thought, which is where I introduce our mannequins right away. For an empty mall, all the mannequins sure made it feel uncomfortably full. No matter where Alex looked, no matter which store she walked into or which hallway she walked down, there were 2 or 3 or 10 of the faceless chalk white people clustered together. I dig this one because A, it's more Alex's perspective. B, I think I said my Doug note in the community or the comment that I left that I want to highlight it, but I'm going to click on the screen. It's going to move. All the mannequins sure made it feel uncomfortably full, gives a more personal touch to the narration. Go ahead, Abby.
No,
you're going to say something.
No.
Okay. And then it also does some double duty of no matter which store she walked into or which hallway she walked down, explains right away that they've been in the mall for at least a few minutes now.
Yes.
And they've been able to explore.
Yes.
So a lot going on in this one. And quite frankly, I might find a way to just repurpose this, reword it a little bit, a paragraph or 2 after that dialogue opening.
Yeah, I like that. I trying to think. I like the second one for reasons that I already stated. But I like this one because I feel like that it accomplishes all the things that you were shooting for. It gives the impression that they've been there, that there's been some wandering, and you get this feeling of building tension with the mannequins. The mannequins add this almost otherworldly creep to it. You know, that they're just mannequins. We all know what mannequins are, but everywhere you look, there's just more and more of them. And it starts that we've all been in places where when you're already creeped out, the normal things start to feel abnormal, and it just adds to that. And I think that your third one here delivers there. So, and then, like you said, if you add this after that dialogue opening, I think that's great.
Yeah.
That's what I was going to say. All 3 of these things, I mean, you can work all of it in.
Absolutely. They could all be woven together to be a tremendous opening.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. I see there's a lot of conversation going on here because I used the term. Is it music or music? I just looked up 80s terms, and that was there describing like the generic, almost elevator-esque music.
Yeah, that's when you have like orchestral pop songs playing over the background music, and it was
I always think generic Kenny G.
Yes, Kenny G is the perfect example. My favorite thing in the 80s when there were bands like Motley Crue that were playing on top 40 radio, okay? Motley Crue, Whitesnake, Poison, stuff like that. And there would be music versions of those songs playing in the grocery store or
dentist
in the mall.
office.
Yeah, and they're like all the guitar solos are saxophone solos, and just it's a perfect music is an absolute perfect thing to place you right there. I want to go back real quick and just because I asked Randall about magical realism. He said there's tradition of voodoo and spiritualism in some of those countries, and religion tends toward magic, bleeding statues, things like that. So that's probably where that comes from. Thank you for chiming in with that, Randall.
It's also magical realism because, I glanced at the article as I shared it. Magical realism stems from realism, which is a visual art style, right? And that stemmed from South America. So it only made sense that it evolved to be a little more magical. I also see here Hope and Haley said that it gives Doctor Who vibes, and I think it was last week we were talking about how I feel intimidated trying to like start watching Doctor Who, but of course I know about the Weeping Angels, and that at least inspired part of this mannequin thing, but also Silent Hill for any of my gamer friends out there. There are the nurses in Silent Hill that are absolutely horrifying. So that's I don't know if these mannequins are going to move like any of those things, but that you draw inspiration from these different places, right? So definitely looking for stuff like that.
All right, Abby, you ready?
Yeah, except that's what I was trying to figure out earlier was how Doug was moving the presentation, because I don't know how. So someone has to drive for me.
You
Okay,
just you hover your mouse over the screen. Abby,
Hover my mouse over the screen.
and you'll see.
Oh,
And-
ha ha ha! Look, I
by
can
the-
do it.
By the way, Doug, do you have a title for your story yet?
My working title is All Sales Are Final.
Okay, All
Because
Sales Are Final.
mall
I love
and
that.
final.
I dig
Thank
that.
you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
that's great. That's great. Okay, Abby,
Okay.
and you're Trapper Keeper, Loser Weeper.
Okay, Trapper Keeper Loser Weeper.
Okay.
It was too late when I thought about how to change this paragraph, so I'm going to read it off my post-it note.
Okay.
As well, my addition that I'm making. So opening with a dialogue. You left off the N, Daria said as they got off the bus. What'd you say? Stupid Stacy rolled her eyes, even though she clearly heard. Daria walked away without answering. She hoped it would drive Stacy nuts, not knowing what she meant. As soon as she got to class, Daria ripped the front page out of her notebook. Stacy plus Daria equals BFF. More like BFFN. Best friends for never. Best friends for never. I think is better. It's meaner. It's meaner.
It is meaner.
She wadded it up, threw it at the wastebasket, and missed.
The mist part kills me.
Best friends for never. That's the line right there.
So I am not going to use this, although I'm going to use parts of this dialogue, I think, in there. Part of what I was trying to do was establish where they were. They're getting off the bus, so you kind of know they're at school. I wanted to establish that actually, if you're looking for the clues after you've read it the first time, you can see that it's actually Daria, the main character, who's being mean because she's thinking things like stupid Stacy, and she's projecting that sort of mean girl thing. But I think as you start off reading it, you think, well, Stacy must have done something really bad to Daria to make her feel that way. But really, the whole thing is sort of based on this idea that, when you first go to middle school, I don't know if this happened to you guys, but we talk about this a lot in our family. It's like you leave elementary school and everybody is kind of the same. Everybody kind of dresses the same. Everybody kind of does all the same things. Then you hit middle school and something happened over the summer, and now everybody is in a certain group. So you had like the goth kids, and you had, the kids who popped their collars and were real preppy. And you had, so like everybody kind of sorts into their own sorting hat of things. And Daria feels like she doesn't fit in any of those, but she doesn't fit in any of those because she doesn't allow herself to fit in any of those. And so that was sort of where I was going with that. So opening with action. The school's lost and found box was mostly empty, save for a few random items like a shoe. Who loses just one shoe? Ew. Daria pushed the lone sneaker aside with the tip of her finger and rifled through the rest of the contents. Her binder was nowhere in sight. So that's where she picks up the cursed item, is the Trapper Keeper. Okay. So I thought that would be another way to sort of like establish where she is at the very least, but it doesn't really establish any of the conflict or anything going on. It just, it puts us right in at the moment when she finds the cursed object. And I actually don't know that has all the pieces that I need, but I might be able to work it in. Okay. So there were pieces of this one that I liked, like that she pushed the lone sneaker aside with just the tip of her finger, because who wants to touch somebody else's grody shoe? Like, I actually stopped myself from writing more about that. But then my last one, and this was actually where I had started my draft that I already did, was middle school sucks. Not sometimes, all of the time. And again, it's kind of that telling narrator, telling you kind of where we are. But I felt like this was something that we all kind of identify with. And so that was kind of where I started, was here. But
okay,
I don't know. Go for it.
Initial thoughts. Initial thoughts. This is such a punch, but that omniscient third person, like we talked about. I love this. This establishes so much with this one line. But I also love that first one, the dialogue back and forth. says so much about the whole vibe of middle school, about these characters and the class struggle of middle school, like you talked about, where everybody kind of self segments. I think this does so much work to establish all of that. I love a mix of like 1 and 3, and I also appreciate what number 2 does in establishing kind of getting us to the point of the story. I get that. So yeah, I don't have anything terrible to say about any of them. But I love.
I didn't think that was an option. I didn't think you were gonna say anything terrible about mine either, Hank.
Told him he could.
I'm sorry, but I think I'm just so proud of you guys.
Thank you.
Yeah.
For me, I want to. Jacob said here, I love that you brings out her voice.
Yes.
If I can switch it back to this one, this actually, when I read this the first time, made me jealous that I don't write for a younger audience, because this is such a fun, sassy voice that you establish so easily here. That just wouldn't work in the genres I write, right? So I'm jealous of that.
Have you even tried though, Doug? You say that.
I mean, I have sarcastic characters. They're sassy in their own way, but honest, actually, for one of them who loses just one shoe, that might work for one of my characters in my main series. Not gonna lie. This one though, see, Hank, you said this is an omniscient perspective, and Abby, I think you did too. But to me, this is just Daria was her name, right? Your main character.
Could be.
This is just Daria.
Yeah,
right. That's her narrating to me, and because I took it in that perspective, I immediately knew, even though you're writing MG horror, you're writing about this trapper keeper that can do these things, whereas I'm writing about a scary mall that's going to, do scary things. You're writing about a kid who hates middle school and doesn't belong. And that is established immediately with these 3 short sentences. So I really like this opening, and I think you can take elements from the other 2 and tie them in right away. But I really like this.
Well, and my only downside with this one, by the way, was that she has her binder to rip the page out of, but technically she has to leave her binder on the bus so that I have a reason for her to go to Lost and Found and get the cursed trapper keeper. So after I wrote this, I was like, but then
you can work that out.
I can work in the BFFN.
Yeah, you could work that out easy.
Yeah.
Easy. I believe in you. Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah. All right. So so do we have a good feel for why these 3 work and why we might want to merge the in my opinion, it doesn't need to be either or, but by isolating these, we can see kind of what each type of opening delivers, and then hopefully kind of braid in a piece of this and a piece of that to really nail that opening. And we've kind of illustrated that. We're over an hour here, so we'll kind of get to wrapping up here. Remember, as you're writing your first draft, every scene must have movement. We're constrained for words and time, so we've got to get to the point. We've got to keep the reader moving. This is not the luxurious, stay in your favorite reading chair for days on end. We need to get to the point. Every scene must have movement, either character, action, or decision. We need to use dialogue to reveal character, not just provide exposition, even though, as I think we've all 3 proven that some exposition is okay if done properly and in context. And we need to balance showing and telling for emotional impact. I think we've all 3 done a good job of balancing showing and telling. And we need to create tension and stakes within each scene. We need to be building to that end. This goes back to every scene must have movement. It needs to be driving us to the end. Next step and homework, write the full first draft of your story. And like we talked about last time, this doesn't mean that if you're shooting for a 10,000 word story, your first draft doesn't necessarily have to be 10,000 words. Maybe of this 10,000 word story, your first draft is 4,000 words, 5,000 words. And then we're going to use that process that we talked about last week of onioning or cycling, of going back through your story, especially after you've gotten to the end and you know what elements need to be added in to build that motion, that tension all the way through. That's a great time to start going back through and adding and adding layers to the onion. Choose a key scene for feedback next session. I would love for each of us to bring an aspect, a scene where we can put it up and discuss it, and maybe something we're super proud of how it turned out, or maybe something that we feel like doesn't quite work and would like to get the others' input.
I might need help making things
Okay.
creepier.
Ooh, that's
okay.
Okay.
What I've really been worried about, was that
Okay.
I would be too vanilla for the creepy factor. So
One of the best pieces of advice I've ever seen about making things creepy is that the less the reader knows about the creepy thing, the creepier it's going to be.
Okay.
So don't be explicit. Don't, like, you can establish rules about how the Trapper Keeper works for you to write, but don't let those rules be known to Daria. Make it super uncomfortable and unknown for her.
Okay.
Yeah, good point. Good point. I would like, as we write this first draft this week, let's reflect on what the hardest part of drafting was, and we can discuss that next week. What are some obstacles we ran up against? What was easier than you expected it to be? I'd love to get both sides of feedback next week. And remember, first draft to be messy. The real magic happens in revision. So, just have fun writing this, get to the end, and then start thinking about what you need to do to make sure your ending echoes your beginning, and that you deliver that emotional payoff at the end that you promised in the beginning. Or start, if that is an issue and you're not seeing how that's working, maybe bring that next week to talk about, and we'll see if we can decide why. Jacob said there's a share your work section in the Storycraft Cafe, so that'd be a great place to highlight that. And Abby can speak to that better than I can, because she's the head mistress of the Storycraft Cafe.
Yeah, actually, I had just put it in the Storycraft Cafe. I didn't specify where, but Share Your Work is the perfect place. And if you want to tag all three of us, one of us in it, to make sure that we see it, do it. Yeah.
I'm open to reading anybody's anything. Tag me all you want, and I'll take a look at it and tell you what I think.
I'll remember that offer, Hank. Anybody's anything.
It'll cost you. It'll cost you.
MJ. In the words of Miss Frizzle, it's time to take chances, make mistakes, and get messy.
Get messy. I love it. I love it. Well, thanks for joining us this week, everybody. This session 2, I feel like we're making great progress. I'm excited to see what you guys come up with, and thanks for joining us.
Yeah. Bye, everybody.
Awesome. Bye, everyone.